Welcome to Drawn Onward. I'm your host, Teresa Janzen, and today I'll interview one of my co-contributors to the She Writes for Him Stories of Living Hope project, Ms. Carol Larson. Welcome to another edition of the Drawn Onward podcast. Today I have with me a fellow author in the She Writes for Him Stories of Living Hope book. This is Carol Larson. Welcome, Carol. I'm so glad you're with us today.
Thanks for having me, Teresa. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, this is such an exciting collaborative book because we all have our individual stories and it's tied together with God's redemption. And so the book is a collection of 30 stories, and this has been a whole series of interviews with the authors. And so people have heard some of those stories. There's 5 categories in the book of redemptive hope. And I've noticed that your story is in the category of addiction. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Well, I'm excited. We'll dig into that a little bit. But first, could you just give us a bit about your background and maybe even how you came to faith?
Faith-wise, I've known Jesus all my life. I'm certain that the day I was born, Mom was telling me about Jesus. I'm pretty sure of it. And so I am so grateful to her for making sure that us kids grew up reading the Bible and praying and just building that relationship with God. I'm single. I've never married. I have always been very career focused. And some of that plays out from my childhood. Being a good Christian girl, I wanted to make sure I did exactly what my parents told me to do. And usually I would draw my own line just a little further back from the line that they gave me. And one of those lines was, you don't allow boys to take advantage of you. And so I'm like, well, I just won't interact with boys at all. So I pulled way back, and it wasn't until in college that I developed friendships with men. But very rarely did I go on a date. And in essence, anybody that didn't have a ring on their finger, I avoided. And so long story short, went through some counseling to work through that, and also was seeking out ways to deal with my loneliness, and found pornography. And that's more unusual for women, but it's becoming much more prevalent in that it gives me a false sense of intimacy. And the addiction to pornography lasted 10 plus years. I sought out help, was so grateful for that. And as I was receiving help, I really sensed God saying, Carol, I want you to help other women walk through their struggles as well. So I went and got that counseling degree, not knowing what to do with it, but I've stepped into private practice and have not looked back.
Wow, that is quite a story. And you're right that pornography addiction is much more unusual, or at least not heard of or talked about, maybe among women.
Yeah, we struggle, but we don't talk about it.
Well, I even wonder if it used to be just look different for women, because I remember as a young girl passing around the steamy novels and things like that.
Yeah, the good old Harlequin romance novels. It was more about the story and the fantasies. A few years ago, I'm going to say maybe 4 years ago, Josh McDowell, he's with Campus Crusade for Christ. He's been with them for like 50 plus years. He had a independent organization do a survey in churches across the country, asking specific questions about pornography and sexuality and sexual interactions and that sort of thing. What he discovered, and very understandably, but somewhat surprisingly, was for men, about 65% of men in churches struggle with pornography.
Wow,
And
65% in the church.
in the church,
Mm,
struggle, not just having looked at it, but they struggle with it, which means
mm,
they're looking at it more than once a week and they're consuming time with it. Okay.
mm.
So then I quickly looked at the women's statistics and was not really surprised because of all the research and work I've done for myself. It was in the 23 to 25% range of women in churches struggle with
Okay.
pornography. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so that's that same thing of they're spending time with it. They're
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
looking at it not just
Right.
occasionally or something. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is this uh, at all connected to stage of life? Is this young women, middle-aged women, married women, single women, all
Hmm.
women?
Yeah. Yeah. I think older women still, will make use of the Harlequin romance novels and that sort of thing. Um, with the advent of the internet, I'm going to say that the teenagers, the 20 somethings, the 30 somethings is where it's most prevalent.
Mm,
Myself, I just had a birthday last month. I hit 6-0. All right. I started struggling with pornography around the age of 31, 32, right in there. And over a span of 12 years, I was silent about it, but then realized I had a problem and chose to tell someone that I knew was safe. They encouraged me to get help. Um, and so, as an older woman, um, I'm a little bit out of the norm, but there are some older women that struggle,
okay. And
definitely.
maybe because you had that access to the technology, whereas maybe some women in
Right.
your age bracket
Well, yeah,
wouldn't have as much. Yeah.
they're more afraid of the technology.
Right, yeah. So I know that with most addictions, there comes one or usually more than one occasion
Mhm.
where people just come to a point and say, something has to change. You know,
Yes.
did so
Yes.
what was that in your life? Because pornography is such a secret behind closed doors
Yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent question. I found myself around the age of 40 or just after, where the pornography didn't satisfy anymore.
Mm,
I'd look every day, I'd look on weekends for hours at a time. Um, and I just wasn't content with it. And research shows that addictions require more
mm.
and addictions require different. And so I sought out other types of pornography than what I first started with. And trust me, I've seen a lot of the absolute horrific yuck that's out there. I hit a point where I was wrestling in my mind. I'm supposed to be a good Christian woman, but I've royally failed in that because I'm lusting and idol worshiping images on a computer screen. And there was something to me that started to say, go out and find it for real. Now, I want you to know that I was instantly terrified. I was freaking out and scared because if I truly went out and found what I was looking for, pain would be involved and submission would be involved. And I knew that that would take me beyond a point that I could never return. And that's what brought me to the point of saying, I need help. So I found up the courage to speak with a very dear person in my life. I shared my struggle with her. She was very wise. She says, Carol, you need some help. Um, you need to find a counselor. You need to get involved in a support group and those sorts of things. And she was and is a huge cheerleader for me today. Um, And so I just am so grateful for the people that have come around me and supported me through all of this. I chose to go to a 5-day intensive workshop in Nashville with Marnie Faree. She wrote a book called No Stones, and that book changed my life. And so I sought out her book, I devoured it. I'm like, how did you get in my head? You're everything you're saying is what's going on up here. And Marnie Faree had a struggle with affairs, multiple affairs. She acted out sexually. I acted in sexually. I isolated myself and just, it was very private. But I knew God saw my every move and I knew it was wrong. So I went to Marnie Faree's workshop. I highly recommend it. It's called Bethesda Workshops. And it changed my life in a bigger way. Before I went, I was unable to say, hi, I'm Carol, I'm a sex addict. And afterwards I came home and said, hi, I'm Carol, I'm a sex addict, a porn addict. And the redemptive process that Jesus so freely gives began. I got involved in a Celebrate Recovery support group. It's a Christian's 12-step program. I lived for Monday nights, every Monday night, year round. I didn't miss for several years.
I'm so glad that you had someone that when you were ready to step forward, that there was someone there who didn't stand in judgment, condemnation.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. You bet.
And that's not always the case in the church.
But you know, Teresa, there's shame attached to this in a
Mhm.
huge way. And I always remind people, Jesus did not come just to forgive our sins. He came to take our shame away from us. You know, in the Garden of Eden, the second that Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they had disobeyed God, they had sinned. Immediately, the very next verse, right after they take that bite, is they realized they were naked and they sewed fig leaves to cover themselves up. And the very last verse of chapter 2 in Genesis, before the serpent Satan shows up, it says, and Adam and Eve were naked and they knew no shame.
Mm.
Can you imagine paradise, that garden? There's no shame. And 7 verses later in Genesis chapter 3, they covered themselves up. And shame has been felt by every human being ever since then. And God, in that garden, God promised the people, Adam and Eve, I'm going to send someone to fix this, to help you. I'm going to send the Messiah because you can't fix it. You're powerless.
Yeah.
And so in the 12-step tradition, here's how I abbreviate the first 3 steps. 1, I can't. 2, Jesus can. He has the power. And 3, I will let him. I will surrender to him and let him. And God has humbled me numerous times and shown me his power and his grace through it all, and has brought me to a place where I'm 13 plus years without looking at porn to this day. And do I struggle? Sometimes, still. I'll think about it. I can still pull up images in my mind. So, you know, it's again, turning my mind and my thoughts over to Christ, having him take them captive. And I think the one Bible verse that resonates very loudly for me is from Romans chapter 12, verse 2, where Paul says, we are to no longer be conformed to this world, but we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind so that we will know God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. The word be in front of transformed indicates I make the choice, but I don't do the transforming. I make the choice to allow it. And in verse 1 of Romans 12, verse 1, it says, in view of God's mercy. So the only way that my mind and heart can be transformed is in view of God's mercy. He's the one that does the transforming. And so what I have valued greatly is reading of scripture and taking in those Bible verses and meditating on them and saying, this is what God desires of me. And as a child, I saw him as a judge, you know, it's like keeping tally marks up there because I had to be perfect, you know. I'm in recovery for perfectionism as well.
Me too.
Yeah, I think many of us are.
Hmm.
But now I see God's grace and mercy as an amazing gift that is given freely, and it encompasses his forgiveness, his righteousness, his sanctification, his power, um, his protection and provision. And also, he allows the trials in our lives so that we can grow and mature in our dependency on him and not on our addictions.
Join us next time for part 2 of this interview with Carol Larson. Drawn Onward is more than an amazing palindrome. It's a production of TeresaJanzen.com.